glasses. Okay, I'd like to call to order the September 24th meeting of the Planning Board. And we have several items on the agenda. Number one is master planning, discussion of housing master plan presentation last week. Two is board to review and sign decision text from previously permitted project. Three is board business review and approve meeting minutes, committee reports, future agenda items, etc. So why don't we start off with the master planning, probably it's sort of a review of the meeting of last week. I don't know, Patrick, if you want to kick that off, or?
Why not? Yeah, most of us had the opportunity to go to the presentation last week on the 19th. It was attended by about 34, 35 individuals. There were a handful of folks there that I considered new to public process, which is always a great thing. To bring people along who are interested in the kinds of things that this board is interested in. So, you always want more, but that's what we had. I was happy that, we did have a good meeting. It was fairly lengthy. We did have a lot of information that this board has been wrestling with for some time. It seemed to me that the majority of the focus was on economics and fiscal analyses. I think that there's so much information that goes into a master plan that the idea of getting to all of it probably would have been more than most people would have been willing to consume at one setting. But I came away with really having wanted a better discussion of, what the cost of land here does to housing, and how that affects or prohibits development. I also had hoped that we'd get to the point of talking about the kinds of concepts that would allow this board to then go further with the concepts in terms of creating zoning amendments. But we didn't really get to that. There's certainly many of that kind of terminology and conceptualization within the master plan document itself. But I know that, in our collective mindsets, we've really wanted to get people supporting, changes to our bylaws or improvements to our bylaws in ways that would allow us to have a more diversified housing stock. And I didn't really get that sense. I don't know what other folks think or feel, but that's what I left with.
Okay. Janelle, any comments?
I just thought it was good to get to the economic pieces, and there didn't seem to be any pushback on those numbers. And I thought that was helpful, and that it was, sort of a balanced meeting.
Okay. Peter?
I thought the most interesting thing was Peter Britton standing up and saying, well, I've got 4 or 5 acres which you could use for, and then the question was, is it for affordable housing? Is it for rental units, or is it for, what kind of a developer can we go out and solicit to come into the town and change the nature of the housing stock that we have? So I was hoping that someone would talk about what the strategy is to capture someone like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth pursuing, and, once we get people's comments, we can circle back to that, and then the 4 goals that were enunciated.
Right, I would just add, I drove through the senior housing project at Canterbrook and took some pictures. I thought it seems to be coming along pretty well. It's very attractive.
Yeah, the word I've heard is that he's selling them faster than he anticipated.
Huh, good.
So,
They're lower in price than Patton Ridge.
say again?
They're lower in price than
Than Patton.
Patton Ridge. By $200,000.
I think they're smaller, are they smaller? than
Some of them
Pine
are
Ridge?
smaller, yeah.
They vary in size, but
Yeah.
price per square foot is a little bit below. The ones that are horribly expensive are the ones on Route 1A in Wenham.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the name of that development is. They're
It's the golf course.
just off the
Yeah.
charts.
They're 1.4 million.
Yes.
They start at
For
one.
basically about the same size unit as either Canterbrook or Patton Ridge have.
Well, they are bigger,
Yeah,
but
they're like
they are
20,
very expensive. Richard, any?
Okay, what I liked was that she had gotten, Judy Barrett had gotten information from the superintendent of schools, which showed the calculation to determine, or not the calculation to determine, but the number, it gave a number to the additional effect of new children on the school district, and that it is not the way it was calculated, it is not that average number of taking the total students and dividing it into the total cost. That wasn't an appropriate number. But the superintendent had good numbers. They were reasonable. They show that it can be determined what I'm gonna call the break-even point of the school district is in terms of getting the total amount of money it needs to pay for its expenses and what little it will cost to bring in additional students, as long as they aren't a whole lump of like one class or something. What I didn't like was stuff that we had discussed before, which is that there were nothing new in there in terms of ideas. It was the same old ideas from the same old people, and it just left me wanting.
Yep. Okay. Laura, were you there?
I was
Yes,
there.
she was there.
I was like, kind of like,
This was her first time at one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was my first time. So, I thought Judy and Jen actually presented really well. I mean, I think I had never talked to them or met them in person, so I think they came off as large depth of experience personally. But you're right, we've seen all the information before, so it wasn't really new information. I didn't hear anyone say, oh, we don't like cottage housing, or we don't like this. It was more like, there was the one comment about why aren't we focusing more on commercial? But I didn't feel like there were that many strong opinions, really,
Yeah.
one way or the other. It was kind of like, maybe we're just gonna go back and digest the information, but I didn't walk away feeling like, okay, we got a good sense of how all of these people
there wasn't a mandate.
are thinking
No.
about this.
Right.
Yeah.
How about the comment about commercial? So, should there be a rezoning of the Winthrop School lot now? Or any other lot, so that if it does become available, there's less controversy that there's already been a decision that will go commercial?
Yeah, well, it certainly could facilitate it. I thought that was an interesting comment. That came from Darcy Dale. And that was in response to the discussion about the need for new revenues.
Yeah.
And I think it was thoughtful in terms of, well, housing shouldn't be the only vehicle to support town services and education. So I think it would make sense to follow up with Darcy and others and say, hey, this is definitely worth discussing, and see if Darcy and other members of the Board of Selectmen would be interested in
Yeah.
having that conversation about, excuse me, what it would take to expand the commercial district, to include Winthrop and possibly other parts of the town as well. And also, I think it would probably be good to have that discussion as an education piece for the Board of Selectmen and others. I know there was a focus on the former landfill, that there's some potential down there. And I think it's worth revisiting that. I'm gonna suggest that if that's where the capital, what they call a capital committee or CAPCOM, and some of the selectmen want to be focusing, is they really need to hire a civil engineer to actually map that entire property and map the vernal pools and the wetlands, and, you know, is there access to any buildable uplands? You know, because various people have various opinions about what is and what isn't available and what can and what cannot happen there. But nobody's done an objective, detailed survey to map it out. So-
Rick,
That
hasn't,
wasn't done when they closed the landfill and they serviced it?
Well, they did certainly for the landfill,
Right.
but not for the adjacent properties, or land, I should say, adjacent land surrounding it, because it's, and I don't have the exact number, but my guess is it's probably 20 or 30 acres. And the landfill, and I don't, again, don't have the exact number, probably was like, you know, maybe 3 or 4 acres. So, I would think, and I would personally further that discussion so that we have some objective, independent, verified information about, is it worth discussing at all?
isn't there some, a lease, hasn't some of that land been leased to somebody putting in,
Well, to the
solar?
Rod and Gun Club, but,
Well, that's not what I mean, the solar panels?
oh,
for-
that's on top of the landfill.
Okay,
Right. All of the landfill that's capped as solar reflector equipment on it, they've been 100% installed now.
100% installed now?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Is it illegal for citizens to go and walk that property at this time?
Yeah. I mean, it's town property, it's
It
leased.
is town property. They try to, because of the shooting ranges and things there, which are more active on the weekends, they try to keep, you know, a level of control there. But during the week, you can certainly go see
Who's
it.
keeping the level of control? The gun club?
Actually, the police department, you know, patrol it fairly frequently. Amoresco has had it gated for quite a while.
So it's
because
fenced.
they've wanted to protect, you know, their equipment and the investment.
They're the ones with the solar panels?
Yes. Yeah, and the powers connect into a very small national grid facility there that takes all the power that's generated and then transfers it.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to, you know, I agree there was a lack of specificity on sort of next steps. So we're looking at 10-year housing goal, number 1, encourage a mix of housing types that are financially attainable and to accommodate changing needs for smaller housing units, accessible units, and that's physically accessible. Rental options to attract new residents and retain existing residents of all ages. So that's pretty broad. So we're going to have to figure out what that means in terms of specific zoning bylaws. So that's not something I think we'll do tonight, but it's something that we need to address.
Which type of bylaw would,
Well, that's a good question. I think it makes sense, and this will be, well, let me go through these and then answer your question.
okay?
Then the number 2 is balanced, diversified housing production with a small-town feel. Well, yeah, that makes sense. How? Smaller scale, well-designed housing development and adaptive reuse of existing buildings and including estate properties. Okay, I think we knew that. Although there was an interesting comment by somebody, I forget who it was, and I think that makes sense, is since we have a limited amount of property, it's either reuse existing buildings. And somebody said, well, how about taking McMansions and dividing them up to 1, 2, or 3 units? Well, that may be an option. Large houses of 6,000 square feet certainly could be. So that's something we want to look at. And then it's an interesting juxtaposition. I know when we talk about density, some people cringe because they're thinking, high density, going to change the character of the town. But I'm thinking it's actually along the lines of cluster housing. It's actually a way to preserve open space by not consuming, single-family homes are all well and good, but they will typically consume 1 or 2 acres of land. And if we're trying to preserve land, like we did with the Open Space and Farmland Preservation Development Bylaw, it was trying to cluster development on a small section while leaving open space on the majority of the land. So that's kind of
And it's never been tried by anyone.
Right, and I think that's why we have to revisit that whole thing. Again, this is kind of, goal 3 is pretty generic, and it's kind of reinforces the others. Promote housing in locations that will minimize impact on existing open space, natural resources, and scenic views. Through creative site planning, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, and areas that are already developed. Makes sense, nothing radical there. And then 4, maximize existing town resources to support the creation of more financially attainable housing options. I don't know what that means.
Because we already try to do that.
Maximize existing town resources to support the creation of more
Town.
financial.
Land,
Right.
Affordable Housing Trust,
Well, Affordable Housing Trust is doing that now.
right.
But this says financially attainable as opposed to affordable.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, that's kind of an amorphous, we can think about that, but I think it kind of like, these are all in a bowl here of things to think about. So, I think that makes sense, but I don't know if anybody has comments on those.
I thought it was interesting, the discussion about rental property. And
Yeah.
that if you can't create amenities, if it's not big enough to have amenities, you can't really charge a higher price, which means it doesn't bring in as much revenue for the
Right.
town. I wondered how that compared to the development, the plans that we saw for that downtown building. Because that did have some amenities in it, correct?
Yes, so I'm going to put on my HDC hat here. I've actually asked Judy to use the template that she used for rental units,
Yeah.
to apply it to that building and see whether it's revenue positive, revenue neutral, or, revenue negative, so.
So I would think location, the fact that it has shelter for cars and has exercise room.
A lot of things are attractive.
Right, it would be able to
Right.
be high rent.
The thing is, the condominiums around the corner on Willow Street, those are about 2 to 3 times the size. And they have actually all private garages,
Yeah,
and they sell for about 600,000.
yeah,
So if I do it on a per square foot basis, the apartments proposed by the downtown committee probably only sell for $250 to investors.
right, but they're for
Rental.
rental, not for sale.
Oh, I know, but their tax contribution
Yeah.
will be based upon what an investor pays for it.
Well, it's
Or
the
quite
income,
possibly-
it's the
No,
income it
based on the
produces.
income that- the
not what
investor
they-
gets from it.
They, appraisers come and go on whether they use reproduction cost or replacement cost or market
Not this
value
one, not this one.
or discounted cash flow.
They're gonna use the income and profit.
Well, that's fine, then you would probably get less than 250,000. What do you, $1,500 a month at a cap rate of 8%
They're talking-
is
Cap rate's much lower than that.
Yeah.
not for this category of property.
Yeah, it is.
You have examples of that?
Yes, as in
Yeah, they
fact,
presented on that
they
last
presented it.
Thursday.
They actually went to the assessor and discussed in great length the cap rate. It's much lower. So
What did they suggest the cap rate was?
I want to say 3 or 4%. It's in the,
Well, and they ran it two different ways with
Three
a higher
different ways.
cap. Yeah, so they actually looked at different ways.
it's in here.
And the rents they were looking at were like 1,800 to 2,000 a month for,
No, it's not in this one.
they were using, they actually would say,
Okay, so the assessor's making, there are almost no cap rates in the United States of 3%.
Well,
That would, hold on a second,
No, I got it.
second. If I was an investor
yeah,
and the appraiser took my income and capped it at 3%, I would be at the appellate board in about 24 hours.
I could be wrong with that number, so, but I know it wasn't.
And, I mean, this is an area about which I know a lot. Institutional grade properties, which have much better management and located downtown, have maybe a 5-6% cap.
Yeah.
3% cap, that's what she wants. Because then she can take $1,800 and blow it up by 30-fold in order to get more tax revenue. But as to what an investor actually pays for that property, it's gonna be nowhere near 3%. It's gonna be twice that.
Well, let's hope you're right.
No, I hope she's right, because that'll generate more tax revenue.
So-
I'm just saying that I think she won't be right. It's just an unrealistic number.
So I don't want to, quote the numbers because I'm trying to remember this. It's in the supplementary information that she produced on the financial analysis, so,
This is the consultant.
yes.
Okay.
So I would suggest taking a look at it, and then if you have some comments on it, that would be helpful, just to see what your take is on it.
because she was doing it based on what the appraiser actually does.
Yeah,
in the
she was
town.
taking her numbers and applying them to this.
Well, the appraiser's working in our interest then,
Yeah.
but she's working unrealistically so.
Where is the supplementary information you were talking about?
Yeah, I didn't see the cap rate, I didn't see the
It's
peak
not in-
present discounted value of the
Is it in the
properties.
master plan update? This document, fiscal
that is?
All
import?
the details behind the
'Cause
financial.
I didn't read
Yeah,
that
I
here.
think they were attachments to the master plan document itself.
We
Okay.
should find that out. And,
Indistributable to all.
right, it should be, because I went to the website, this is on it. Their presentation and our presentation, but not the supplementary detail. So if we could find that and post that, that would be helpful,
I'm not gonna be able to,
because you're not going to be here.
yeah. If
Well,
you,
eventually.
yeah, definitely eventually.
How do we get it posted? Who's the vehicle?
Michelle Lee,
Okay.
yeah, Carol,
When are you leaving?
tonight.
Oh,
This is it, Rick.
Yeah, this
This
is
is
it.
it. Say goodbye.
yeah. Well, he's not leaving permanently.
Well, I get that, but 3 weeks at least,
Will be coming
so
in
it's gonna
first.
seem like forever.
So how long will you be out?
2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks, okay. So I'll see if I can find it and talk to Michelle about getting it posted.
I would be really interested in what you find out.
That way,
Another one.
we'll have some
I
detail.
mean,
I
the
just,
more I think about it, that's a gross cap rate on gross income rather than net. It's insane,
just,
totally insane.
could be, so let's wait until we get you the information. I don't want to quote information that could be incorrect. As I said, there were a lot of things going on, so that's what I kind of remember, but I could be.
That's my general critique of this, the report. I completely agree, the marginal cost numbers they got out of the school board were pretty close to what they gave the finance committee 2 years ago. I mean, very, very close. On the other hand, the assumptions made about the number of school children per unit across the 4 different categories made no sense, was to me internally contradictory, was just,
Where did you find it contradictory?
bigger units had 1/4 as many children as smaller units. Okay? No, I would have thought bigger units would have more children per unit than smaller units. It's right in there.
Right.
It ignores the fact that everybody who wants to live here in any kind of housing is likely to have children, because they want to take advantage of the schools. Yeah, it's a self-selection problem. So all of those assumptions got me. 3% gross income cap rate is just,
So
I mean,
I get it,
I just disagreed with a ton of financial assumptions made throughout the reports.
Well, that's all well and good, but if we're,
Just
if
my
you.
opinion.
No, well, hey, you're welcome to your own opinion, but you're not welcome to your own facts. So I would suggest that if you think it's flawed, we ought to flush that out so we get down, and I'm not saying your concerns aren't valid. I'd love to
I
hear,
wrote Patrick an email with all my concerns about the fiscal impact. I had not been aware anywhere from reading the report about the 3% cap.
you're harping on this 3%, and I just said multiple times, I may be incorrect with that number, so please, let's not stick to that.
Okay.
I'd like to.
4% would be, still be ridiculous.
I'd like to get the facts on the table so we can have an educated discussion. And if you think they're flawed, I'd love to hear that. And I'd like to know where they're flawed so that because the whole point of this exercise was to get objective, independently verifiable information from which to build the basis of an informed, intelligent discussion. So if you've got an alternate opinion and you can find flaws in it, then we ought to know that before.
I need the documentation that says 3%, 4%, whatever it is.
That's what we just said,
Okay.
that we would get that and post it, and once I find that, I'll send it around to everybody so that you have that. And I'd really appreciate if you could go through that, and if you've got issues or concerns, is please point them out and bring that information forward. But I'd ask not just to say, I don't agree with it. I'd like to see the data that substantiates your position. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, Patrick, you want to send around the email I sent to you?
Sure.
Okay.
So,
have
I
time
think that
to-
was polite enough. Okay.
so, because I want to make sure that, we're working on sound data. So, if you've got an alternate position and you can substantiate it, that's great. So anyway, I think that's for now, kind of like where we are with this. My personal, but I'm only speaking for myself, is I'm thinking we might want to tackle the open space and farmland preservation development bylaw, because that's cluster housing. That was an attempt to preserve open space by clustering development in a, what would you call it, common wall, or? Because I think that will get at
I
some
don't
of.
think there are very many parcels with enough acres to do clustering. It's supposed to be at least 10 acres, but how many
The
10-acre
parcels on
parcels?
Essex Street big enough? What's his name, Johnson's, and there's 2 big parcels there now.
Well,
I think are up for
okay.
sale.
Yeah, I don't know that Johnson's selling it.
So, we're not gonna get into this level of detail. I'm sure there's many 10-acre or larger pieces of property that could accommodate cluster housing. I mean, we had,
Well, that's what I was hoping the consultants would really do. Go through the assessor's data and select, all right, here are the 15 parcels that are greater than 10 acres or whatever, and then go and check them out as to whether they're already
Feasible.
protected.
That's a level of detail you wouldn't do in a master plan.
Yeah,
That's a very specific, you would do that potentially in the development of a bylaw. And say, okay, this is what we're thinking, what's the basis of our, we've got to substantiate the basis of your assumption. Do we have 10-acre parcels or larger, and how many do we have? And so we could then project how many it might apply to. And does this
That
make?
was in the original master plan, you can go look at that, and have a lot of it.
I don't think it has the number of 10-acre properties, though. I don't recall that being there. If it is, great.
It had all the protected properties.
Yeah, but that's different from developable properties. We know where the protected properties are.
Well, my contention is that there are very few
I understand that.
that are developable.
There's two
I
different
understand
things
that,
there.
but we don't know that. So let's find that out. So if you have a better place to start, I'm all ears. So, and the other one is
Take it out.
the great estates worth pursuing,
Yeah,
again,
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
third time.
right.
What are
So,
we gonna do with the great estates?
I don't know.
What great estates are we talking about?
We have a,
Bylaw that we have.
we have a great estates bylaw that
Yeah.
allows, and Peter, correct me, or anybody else on the board that remembers, allows a great estate owner, and is it 10 acres or more?
Well, I forgot that part, but
That's at
you
least,
have to develop the house first
Right.
before you can do additional things
Right.
on the land, and that's the flaw.
Yep, and we tried to
You
get
gotta-
it fixed.
Okay, you're talking about number 8,
Simultaneously.
Rick? Open space and farmland preservation development
yeah,
bylaw, okay.
that's the
yeah.
cluster bylaw.
Right,
OSFPD.
Yeah.
yep. Do you want to show Peter parts of this, or?
No.
Okay, fine.
I think that's a deep dive, but I think we ought to, and let sort of Brian be the chair of that discussion, is what do we want to focus on?
Yeah.
Where do we want to take this next? Those are two obvious places, but if people have other ideas, I'd love to hear them. The whole point was to try and create a objective database from which to proceed forward. And I've made my view known that I think the finance committee should be helping guide this discussion, as we look at options, what do they see in terms of, cost benefit? And where they think the town would be best served by new development. If they so choose to get involved, they may or may not want to do that, but I think this really needs to be driven with some, cost benefit to this. It's like, people can say, well, I don't like high-density development. Okay, but what's the alternative? Do you want to pay a higher tax rate? Well, some people will, some, I'm guessing majority won't, well, if you don't like high density, what other options would you suggest? So we can put out a number of those and then see how those play out. But I think that would be what my next step would be as a
What
suggestion.
if we look backwards, Rick, and took Canterbrook and Patton Ridge? And I can't think of anything for the last 20 years that's been I guess, I don't know.
Keep going.
I'm trying to think of how many other developments have there really been? There've been no subdivisions for a long time.
Actually, probably the thing we should do is look at the Junction development,
Yeah,
which was
and then,
2,000 square foot cluster detached townhouses.
right, and then the
And see how
Cutter,
many children there are in the school system from that development.
yeah.
There's something
That's
like
really rental,
15
too.
units.
No,
I get-
those are condos.
But,
They're condos.
but
My
they've been
guess
rented
is-
out.
My guess is there's an average of one student per house. Having watched the school bus pull in and looking at the cars and whatnot and so forth, pretty close to one, which is 3 times as many students as was assumed in all of the housing scenarios that were presented in the master plan. And those are attached townhouses. They're, I mean, they're quite nice, actually, in some sense more upscale than most of the housing options that were presented in the master plan. And they're pretty popular, I think.
That's good.
Except that at one student per house, they won't come even close to covering their cost. Because the value of those units is about the same as the average house in town, which is $600,000. And the average house in town has only 0.4 students per house.
So
And
what
I believe that these houses have actually quite a lot more children than that. That'd be a
So-
really interesting thing to find out.
And so, let's pretend we did that. So what would you then conclude?
Then I would conclude that all the assumptions in the report are wrong.
So let's set that aside.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, it would provide some evidence
Yeah.
about
Okay.
what happens if you build higher density housing, okay? Do you in fact get nothing but single and elderly people and so on who have no kids in the school? Or in fact, is it a very attractive housing option, especially for young families with younger kids? And,
So you just.
I mean, that would be a good,
Compare
a
the
good test,
junction
a good
with,
test.
So-
It's a very nice.
Good piece
I mean,
of data.
To my thinking, the design on that project
So-
is considerably nicer than Patton Ridge or Canterbrook, even though it's designed for different audiences. It wasn't designed as senior housing.
So let's pretend we do that, and we determine the number of school students that's in that particular cluster of housing. So what? What do we do with that?
Because at the same time, there are other houses which aren't turning over. People are aging in place, and so there are
Right, that's
no
why-
children there.
That's why the average in town is only 0.4,
Right.
right? Because you have
Mhm.
people aging in place, and you have the new people coming in.
No, and that's also why you have the population decrease.
Yeah.
Because if people are aging in place, you're not getting families to move into those.
That's correct.
I mean, I
These
talked
are
to,
replacement, these may
Yes,
be
yes, but
replacement
the point is,
families for the
as,
town.
as those houses turn over, they're going to turn over to families, not to other people aging in place, because they're not even from town. So it'll turn over to younger families, and then you can still ask the question, if we're developing new housing, are we going to assume new housing at particularly higher density? Are we going to assume it's 0.4? Are we going to assume it's less than 0.4, which is what the report does? Or are we going to assume what some new housing developments in town that actually sell and are occupied, what they're doing?
So,
great idea.
you know, that's all well and good, but so let's pretend we make some assumptions about whatever housing you're talking about. I want to get a sense of where you think we should be going in terms of potential new housing options. And I want not, and I don't want it riding just on school children. I want to hear your sort of vision.
Well, but I'm trying to stay with the concern that was expressed at the meeting about fiscal and economics.
I understand, and so
I'm not going to get into design or anything else.
I'm not asking for design, I'm asking for, do you think it makes sense for different housing options for singles, for divorcees, for people that want to downsize in general?
I think that the number, you build housing like that, and my guess is that the share of those housing units that are actually occupied by current residents of Hamilton who are either retiring, or they're getting divorced, they're doing something else, is tiny. And that mostly what you'll be doing is providing housing for senior citizens who come from, all around the region and find Hamilton a nice place to live. But the notion that the public has this view that somehow if we provide these, housing options, the people who are currently here are going to
Right over.
age, the people who are currently here and get divorced, trust me, they're not going to stay here. They're going to split apart and live in other towns. And the people who are, there may be some seniors who want to age in place, except when Canterbrook opened it up for local preference, they didn't get a single phone call.
So,
That was very telling. That was, what they got was lots of inquiry, and the people that are buying Canterbrook are from, I don't know, Linfield.
is that a bad thing?
Actually, some of the conclusions that you drew, like about divorced families, is completely incorrect. I can think of 3 or 4 or 5 off the top of my head of divorced people who remained in town. I know of one I just found that I knew where the couple lived, and I know the wife is still in the house, and the husband has a residence in another part of town.
so.
So your conclusion doesn't have any, needs some more data to
Well, you're not-
substantiate.
We're not gonna go into the divorce
Yeah, I know.
cases.
This is getting way too far into the weeds.
My question is this, is it bad that we're building housing, potentially building housing of a lower cost, higher density that would accommodate singles, divorcees, couples that wanna start a family, that come from outside Hamilton? Is that bad?
Right now, those other places are
That,
providing
if the town wants to diversify its population and its tax base, then that's what that will do, but it won't satisfy local needs. That's a kind of a mistake. Hold on.
I got
And
it.
secondly, when I do the numbers on those kind of developments, they never pay for themselves. I just totally disagree with all this.
Well, I
And I'm
understand.
using the marginal cost numbers. I'm not using the
okay.
average cost.
Again,
That's
and that's why I said, Bill, you've been very clear about your disagreement with the numbers that were developed by our consultant. And that's fine, and I'll say this again, you're welcome to your own opinion, but you're not welcome to your own facts unless you are willing to do the homework to substantiate your opinion. So you can sit there and tell us you don't agree with them, which is fine, and you can give us sort of anecdotal.
Well, some of these
No,
are
no,
all
let me
based on
finish, let me
assump- on
finish, no, let me
assumptions,
finish,
right?
let me finish,
So
let me
I-
finish. Anecdotal data is not gonna help us with an informed discussion. So.
That's why I say, just Patrick, go look at, I don't know the name of the development. What is,
So, let's leave it at that.
Junction.
So, you
Yeah,
made a
Carriage
very.
House Junction.
Carriage House?
So you made a very telling comment, that if we want to build diversified housing, that it will add to the tax base and solve the town's financial problem while providing alternate housing. Isn't that what we're trying to do here?
You've entered a mythical heaven world where you can build all sorts of housing, and it's going to attract diversified people, plenty of students. It's still going to pay for itself. There's
No,
trades.
I didn't say
It's
that.
not going to pay for itself.
I didn't say that.
If it doesn't pay for itself, then the tax
So,
rate will go up.
so, what I'm hearing from you is, don't do anything.
I would like to be able to go to the town and say, the best thing this town has going for it probably is some dowager empress who lives in a, 6,000 square foot house on 10 acres and pays, there's only, 2 dozen of them left in town, and pays $40,000 a year in taxes. That's as much as 4 or 5 other families, and doesn't use a lick of services. And all I hear is, gee, we should take that property and carve it up into, whatever we're going to do, and the assumption is we will get more rateable value out of it. Well, you'll get some more rateable value, but those estates are worth $2 million now, paying $35,000 or $40,000 a year taxes. And so we'll get, more houses, but we'll also get a ton more kids in the school, and we'll also get a ton more service usage. You have to
So-
be very careful about doing that. So without ever getting into
So,
any
Bill,
aesthetic question,
Bill.
do we like the old houses? Do we want to carve them up? The fiscal numbers are, those houses are cash cows,
So,
totally cash
let me
cows.
repeat my question and see if you can answer it. So your suggestion is to do nothing? Because
I'm just
you've
for
just come
the
up with a fantasy, you're talking about my fantasy, Now, I'm talking about your fantasy, that there's a dowager in home, that we will have 10 dowagers that own multiple acres that are paying lots of money into town.
It doesn't
We-
matter. Those houses could have 2 or 3 kids in the school, and they'd still have a fiscal surplus using the numbers.
Bill, you're not answering my question. So what's so hard about this? Do you think that you could actually answer my question? What are you suggesting? Are you suggesting doing nothing? You're telling me all these scenarios. I'm not hearing.
For me, keeping open space in big estates makes economic sense and meets all the town's goals for open space. Infill development has to be done very carefully to make sure that you're not building stuff that raises the town tax rate significantly, given that the town's tax rate is already higher than the surrounding towns.
So.
Not by much, but a little.
Okay, now we're making some progress. So, so basically you're saying, do as little as possible, and maintain open space, and it sounds like not much of a change in any kind of housing unless it's really small incremental.
I'm in favor of infill development, particularly on crazy old abandoned sites. Do something useful with them. But don't pass an ordinance that allows people to stick little houses in on all sorts of corner lots that are 1,500 square feet. I think you're gonna get a rash of kids in school and not have the financial support for
Well,
the
first of
house.
all, we're not doing that. That's nowhere near what we're even talking about.
Isn't that what cottage housing is about?
Not necessarily. Cottage housing, you could put 10, 20, 30 houses on a property that is equivalent to, if it's a large enough property, that's equivalent to your mansion,
Right.
and get a lot more money for your, bang for your buck.
And you'd get a ton more service usage.
Okay, so
I
this.
mean, it's just, you really.
But if you're gonna argue that, you need to sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and put facts and figures on the paper, have them substantiated, and that's what Rick's asking you to do. And it's not to going on and say you're gonna get a ton of this and a ton of that, and a which of this and a which of that. You gotta
Well,
substantiate
some
what you're
things
saying.
you can't, that's why I think looking at the carriage crossing would be kind of instrumental in order to try and find some examples
I
of
think-
market rate,
I would like to,
high-density housing, who's actually living in them.
I'd like to add to the example that, like we were talking about Junction, the Cutter property. I think that was 40 acres altogether, and it's been divided into
Cutter or Cutler?
Cutter.
Cutler Ridge?
Cut-
Cutler Ridge?
Cutler Ridge, right, Cutler,
Is
sorry.
that
Cutler.
Woodlawn
And-
Mead?
No.
Well, no.
Yes, it's
It's-
backed up to it.
It's across the street from my daughter, I know that, because they're going in and they're making
They're
a
killing
lot
it.
of very oversized lots,
Yep.
and with big houses on it. And I think there are 8 or 10 houses that are in that development, or will be in.
Yeah, they chewed up a lot of property.
Yeah.
7, I think.
So I think this is interesting.
Well, we
'cause
ought to
they-
investigate those kinds of properties and see
so
what the
they're
fiscal
probably
impact has
trying to build
been.
houses somewhere in the $1.5 to $2 million range, right?
Mhm.
One's 2 acres, 3 acres,
Yeah,
something like that. Well, that house contributes
Let me,
7%, that contributes $30,000 a year.
So
That covers the cost of 3 children in school.
Bill, let me throw this out and see if this answers your concern. So as we pursue whatever the options might be, let's say cluster housing or great estates or some variation thereof, what I'm hearing you say is that you want a cost-benefit analysis to understand the fiscal impact.
Yeah, it was, that's what I hoped would come out of here, but it just,
I understand.
It
We've
didn't.
heard that. Could we stay with the topic now? So what I'm hearing you say is you want a cost-benefit analysis of any options that we pursue.
yes.
Okay. So, how would you propose about getting that data and fiscal analysis done? Would you hire a consultant to do that, or?
Well, I think contacting the school board was the right
No,
way.
no.
For the consultants did, I'm saying,
Yeah,
what the consultants did in contacting the school board came up with a set of numbers that they also gave the finance committee. So, ignoring for the moment that if we do whatever we're going to do on the large scale, then we'll have to change the school budget quite a lot. Right now, when the school board gives you a marginal cost number, it's because they've got excess capacity, and they, have to hire a few new teachers. A lot depends on the scale of the project, but they can get by with a marginal cost that's about half of what average cost is. I think that's a great piece of analysis.
Okay, I think
The
one,
police and fire sitting around saying, well, we could probably handle all the calls. I really just don't, there's no evidence that that's true. In statistical analysis of cities that grow, the cost of services always goes up more than proportionally. A town grows and experiences growing pains, a suburban town, and goes from 5 to 10 to 20,000 people. The cost per person actually goes up. They
So
just have to do more
Can we
stuff.
go back to my original question? Is, you're looking for a cost-benefit analysis, that's what you
Mhm.
told me, right? Am I wrong?
That's what I'm looking for, and I didn't
Am I
feel we
wrong?
got it in this.
So I'm not wrong.
No.
Okay. So my next question was, and let's see if we can stick to my question, how would you go about getting that data to do the detailed cost-benefit analysis? Should we hire a consultant to do that?
Yeah, we could hire maybe an economic consultant, but I don't offhand know, or we could piece together numbers ourselves, given what we know. A lot goes into assumptions.
Exactly. And so we need to have, my belief is, and the other members may disagree with me, independent, objective data from a reliable source, because the challenge in doing this is that you'll make assumptions that may or may not be correct and may not reflect good practice, industry practice, or we may be missing component pieces in developing that scenario. So I think it's incumbent upon us, and I've always said this, so I don't think this is anything different from what actually you're suggesting, is that we need to substantiate the cost benefit of the kinds of options we may be pursuing. So the question is, would this board support going to, for example, the Board of Selectmen? Let's say we have 3 options. I don't know what those are, but let's pretend they're cluster, they're great estates and cottage, just for the fun of it. And we want to hire a consultant that you think is capable and competent, and you can have confidence in their capabilities, background, and experience.
Just to do the fiscal
Right.
impact analysis. I think it'd be a great idea. The town finance committee, which I'm not sure they have a budget,
They
but I'm
don't?
sure, what?
They don't.
They don't. I'm sure they would appreciate, they would support this approach. This is the thing they're always worried about.
So,
But
okay.
even though they couldn't dump any money into the pot.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, as long as we did a credible, competent, capable job of doing the cost-benefit analysis on whatever options we were looking at, that you would support that endeavor.
Yeah, and the thing that people, there was, we can talk about the marijuana farm since it's off the table. There was a lot of support, actually, for the marijuana farm in town, because people were looking to expand the industrial base of the town, in which they use no services, and it's all free tax revenue, unlike the case of housing, where you pay for what you get and get for what you pay.
Well, I think,
And that's the problem is figuring out where and how to develop an industrial base is really difficult in this town.
true. So I think that gets into the commercial. So I just wanted to get to see if we could find some consensus on a general way to proceed from what I'm hearing.
Rick?
Because you've been the most strongly opinionated on this, that you're on board with that concept.
Yeah, I think an economic consultant doing a
Okay.
fiscal
Rick?
impact analysis. And we could ask them to look at recent developments and tabulate up from the school committee how many students there are from this development and that development, and actually get some numbers to.
That's what they would do.
Yeah, yeah.
Rick, to back up on your point a little bit, I agree with the concept of substantiating numbers that have been going on in this discussion. Judy Barrett states in one of the two documents, the master plan presentation, or the one that was back in August, that subsequent evidence supports her prognostication, so to speak. Whatever she said for the numbers, the potential numbers, they came to be true. So that might not be a bad place to start. I know Bill doesn't
Well,
like her.
we have a lot of data, so whomever was going to do this has a substantial base of information from which to start.
I'm talking about other times and other communities.
No, I get it,
Yeah, okay.
They will obviously use what data we have on our community, and then the whole point is to say, well, what is the experience in other like-sized communities?
Right.
So that we are.
I mean, there's also a literature on this. The Urban Land Institute has books about fiscal impact analysis, and
Got
an
it.
economic consultant would
Got
be
it.
able to summarize that literature about what we know. and so forth.
I don't think it needs to be
I
an
got it,
economic
I got it,
consultant.
I got
I think it could go to anybody that's skilled in real estate and markets and
For economic.
communities, social scientists, a lot of people could do the work.
Maybe I'm being overly sensitive here, and people can tell me I'm off base.
Oh, you're okay.
I want to start off on a base that we agree to, so that, and what I don't want to have happen is if we decide to pursue whatever this housing type is, that halfway down the road, somebody on this board or the public, and the public may come in and do that because they haven't got the same information, starts throwing, but I don't want this board to be doing it. If we agree on a course of action, that suddenly somebody says, well, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, it's not been substantiated. So that means we'll all be on the same board, we'll be looking at the same data, we can question that data and validate it to the best extent possible, but then that's what we are working with, and that's what we go forward with. Does that make sense? Yes.
Yeah, I support that.
Okay, good. So I think that's enough of this conversation for tonight, because otherwise.
Good hour.
Because, we could be going at this for the next, and will be for many, 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 many meetings.
Can we
Okay.
get a hold of the information that Tom Ford put together, developing the Esdale property? Do we know what he thought he was gonna get?
Oh, I think that's ancient history, and I also don't think it's valid because he never completed it, never brought it to fruition in any way, shape, or form, so we have no idea.
So,
Whether it would be
Ask him
valid or
a little
not.
bit about it.
Huh?
well, go ahead, see what you can find.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna suggest we move on to the next topic.
Good idea.
I used to know a company 30 years ago that did this left and right, but their founder, who was a former student, it's called Cambridge Systematics. They've moved on to other things. They don't do this stuff anymore. But I'm sure there's a.
We can find
They're
them.
plenty.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We can find them.
I'm sure there are companies.
So the next topic is board to review sign decision text from previously permitted project. Patrick, can you
Explain this to us.
Okay.
lead us through this maze?
Couple of years ago, the school committee had the Parks and Rec director bring a project to this board which included artificial turf fields at the high school. It also included lighting, I think either 8, 9, or 10 80-foot lights, a run-in track as well. This was part of a larger $9 million project. As you probably well imagine, when a municipality pursues a project, they have to do it in bites. And they came to this board with this turf field, largely project, understanding that they had design money, they wanted to get it permitted, but our site plan review approval lasts for 1 year. So what we need to do, and I will admit, I did not prepare the actual decision at the culmination of that permitting that took place. This board approved the project that had the turf fields, the lighting, and the track on September 5th of 2017. So what I need to do is write that up based on the minutes that I included and some notes that I had as well, dating back to that point. But as I recall, what was important to the board was that you wanted to have a understanding of the scheduling of the use of the athletic fields. Beyond that, I know that the applicant wanted to have a permit that would be renewable. Again, our site plan review permit only lasts for a year. So
they were this plan was floated when I was on the planning board 25 years ago. They first came with the turf fields and the lights. And they've been kind of bouncing it around every 5 years.
Well,
And-
is this the school board, the regional school board?
yes, and
Right.
They are, as we're discussing this, I have asked the Parks and Rec director to go to them and let them know where we're at, and ask them, do you want to do anything different? What's your input at this point? What's your timing at this point? Is there anything that the board needs to know prior to us preparing a real
Did
decision text
Did the
that this
regional
board
school
can
board
execute?
decide what they're gonna do with Long
It's been a
Meadow?
little bit of a contentious issue. 'cause
Well,
it's expensive.
It is expensive,
expensive.
and that's why they came to us and they made it very clear that we have design money now, we don't have construction money now, so this will be a long-term project. They fully anticipate building, bathrooms, ADA improvements, other kinds of things in time as money is available, and it isn't right now. But
So
they,
they would like something like a rolling site plan review that, we can rubber stamp every 3 years or 4 years, and they can go about trying to get this project approved without having to worry about reapplying for site plan review? Assuming the project hasn't really changed much.
yeah, I don't anticipate it to change very much because they want the same things that they used to, as I'm told. And, they would like to have the ability to come back and, renew that approval based on how much funding they happen to have at a particular time that allows them to construct over time.
But they're not considering Miller's property and
No, sir.
Farnham's property and all that?
Yeah.
This is just an update on what that we've already
Exactly,
approved
no more.
before.
Right.
I
No,
remember
right, or
this
no more.
discussion. Yeah. And I remember the discussion of it was going to be incremental, but before they could even do something incrementally, they had to have the whole
Right.
sort of approved by the planning board.
Good memory.
So what are you asking for tonight?
I'm just letting you know that
What it's gonna
we've
do.
contacted the school committee. I've given you some of this background. When I come back, I'm hoping that they will have had, the school committee, the ability to sort of put their thoughts together. So if they want to tell us or ask us something different into this approval, well, we can deal with that.
Okay.
Otherwise, we deal strictly with what was in the minutes and the board approved in 2017.
Okay.
Does that sound reasonable?
I think, yeah, having a document that's very clear,
Sure.
and that as long as there's no change, we can reapprove it. And if there is, then we reopen the discussion.
Exactly.
Okay,
That's, yeah, great.
Great.
are we good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Board business, review and approve meeting minutes, September 10th, 2019.
I move the minutes of September 10th.
Yeah, before you do move it, can I just say, I read back through that thing, and I thought there were a lot of non sequitur sentences in it, and I started to mark it up, but, I mean, it said pedestrian use would be provided, but they didn't say what it was or how. And the goal of the architect was to minimize visual intrusions. But what was the meaning of those kinds of phrases? And then, I don't know, there's some other things. I mean, we can just say they did it, and we leave it at that, but landscaping was discussed, as was the bridge to the train over the lowlands. But it doesn't say how, what was concluded, what did they really say?
Or that we didn't, that we talked about moving it over.
Yeah, that was not reflected at all in these minutes. I thought the minutes really needed to be tightened up. 5 of the 9 units had private balconies. Well, that's good.
What are you,
Bridge to the train over the lowlands. I don't know, I just thought there were a lot of things that were not well-defined.
well, that should be drain, I think. Landscaping was discussed, as was the bridge.
No, the bridge to the train. Anyway,
I don't know what that means.
We,
Train.
meant the bridge, there was bridge over some kind of a low area to allow people to
not-
get access to the train station across the street.
Yeah.
That's what that was
well,
referring to.
it was preliminary, so we can just approve the minutes and then when they come back, let's tighten it up and really know what we're talking about.
Well, they're not gonna come back from anywhere.
Yeah, they're not coming back. If you approve the minutes, they're gone.
That's right.
So if you have specific editing comments, you need to do that now or in the future.
Go ahead and approve the minutes.
But it was informational meeting anyway,
Right,
so it's
right.
not relevant to
That's what I'm
any
saying.
application yet.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
So I second the motion for the
To approve the
approval,
minutes,
to approve
yes.
the minutes.
okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those, any opposed? None, okay. So the minutes are approved. Any other discussion?
Patrick, you sent around the email earlier in the day about Highland
That's next week.
next week. Okay.
Next time.
So just to summarize, you will be leaving tomorrow and returning mid-October?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, couple, 3 weeks.
Okay. In the interim,
You can speak with the building department. Mary Ellen Feener is the administrative assistant in our department, so she will take calls, answer questions, whatever.
and you prepared an agenda for the next meeting, I think?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so in theory, you would be back for the meeting following that?
I'm hoping to.
That would
Okay.
be the 18th, I think. The 4th is the next one.
No, the
The-
first is the next one.
First is the next one.
15th?
Yeah, 15th.
Yeah, and just for informational purposes, on October 1st, the Hamilton Development corporation will be having a public, it's really a butters, a neighborhood meeting in this room at 6 PM to go over pretty much the same plans that this board saw a couple of weeks ago. So,
What day is that?
October 1st.
October
Right
1st.
before our meeting next week.
Yep. So it'll be from 6 to 7, and from 7 to whatever, we will be meeting. So, and then we have received the application for the site plan review at 59 Willow.
That's correct.
And
Because of the advertisement, that will take place on the 15th.
the first meeting.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah, the beginning of the hearing.
okay.
Whereas in the first October meeting, Canterbrook has requested some modifications to the unit numbers. They want to be able to modify the decision so they can build more units quicker than what the schedule was in the original special permit. So that will be to you at the
Yes, they're
next.
selling.
And the reason being because they're selling them, right?
They're selling,
I
yeah.
just see the amount of seagulls
And
that
they'd
hang out on
like-
the first building.
They'd like to get foundations.
What'd you say?
in
Seagulls on the
before
first
bad
weather.
weather.
You drive by at like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and there's like a
Oh.
1,000 of them.
From the, yep.
It's Cutler School is always,
Yeah, and I think they go between the two.
Oh, the seagulls.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
figured out the why of that.
We can go home?
No, not yet. Sit right down.
Now what are we gonna do?
We haven't
Sit
adjourned
down.
yet, Peter.
I assume you are going
Well,
to.
would you like to make a motion?
Best you sit down.
Yes.
Would
I
you-
move to go home.
No, no,
Oh,
no,
no,
that's,
no.
that's not a league. that's
Well,
not
we're all gonna
illegal.
go to your house and Gretel's gonna get out
So we're going to
coffee
your
and tea.
house?
No.
Okay. Would you like to try that again?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.